The timing couldn't be worse for Beijing's military ambitions. As tensions in the Taiwan Strait reach new heights in 2025, internal documents leaked to Western intelligence agencies reveal additional high-profile purges in PLA's strategic and operational commands, indicating persistent corruption risks since the Bloomberg revelations of early 2024. Intelligence reports show specific failures within Rocket Force, including missiles filled with water instead of fuel and missile silos constructed with malfunctioning lids that cannot open properly. U.S. intelligence assessments suggest the corruption within the Rocket Force and Defense Industrial Base remains so extensive that Xi Jinping may be less likely to initiate military action in the coming years. But the full scope of these problems only became clear when key military commanders began disappearing from public view. The 2025 Purge Wave. The systematic removal of key personnel began with Admiral Miao Hua's suspension in November 2024. As a member of China's Central Military Commission and head of its political work department, Miao had been responsible for senior personnel promotions and ensuring ideological conformity within the PLA. His investigation for serious violations of discipline marked the beginning of what would become the most extensive military purge in modern Chinese history. The mysterious vanishing acts that followed began quietly. Admiral Chen Weiming, commander of the Eastern Theater Command Navy responsible for Taiwan Strait operations, failed to appear at a scheduled military parade in Fujian province. His absence drew little attention initially, explained away as illness by military spokesmen. But Chen never reappeared. By December, 3 more senior commanders had similarly evaporated from public view without explanation. General Liu Haoqian, deputy commander of amphibious assault forces, missed his scheduled appearance at a joint training exercise with Russian naval units. Colonel Wang Jinghua, director of Taiwan invasion logistics planning, stopped attending Central Military Commission briefings. Navy Captain Zhou Mingshan, who had overseen development of landing craft modifications specifically for Taiwan beach assaults, disappeared from his post at the Dalian Naval Academy. The pattern became undeniable when General Ma Xiaofeng, head of the 74th Group Army's Amphibious Assault Brigade, vanished in January 2025. Ma had been instrumental in developing specialized urban warfare tactics for capturing Taiwanese cities and had personally briefed Xi Jinping on invasion scenarios just months earlier. His sudden absence from a critical training exercise involving beach landing simulations sent shockwaves through military intelligence circles. Unlike previous purges that targeted Rocket Force commanders and defense procurement officials, this wave was systematically removing personnel who possessed specific knowledge of Taiwan invasion plans. The scope of the 2025 purges dwarfed anything seen in 2023 or 2024, where earlier removals had focused primarily on the strategic support force and rocket units. The new wave cut across all military branches with surgical precision. The Navy's South Sea Fleet lost 4 senior officers in 2 months. The Air Force's 9th Air Division, responsible for establishing air superiority over the Taiwan Strait, saw its commander and 3 deputy commanders simultaneously relieved of duty. Even the Marine Corps, China's elite amphibious assault force, lost its top 3 operational planners. Intelligence analysts noted that every dismissed officer had direct involvement in Taiwan invasion preparations or cross-strait military operations. What triggered this dramatic escalation remained classified until leaked internal communications revealed the scope of Western intelligence penetration into Chinese military planning. Foreign intelligence services had apparently gained access to detailed invasion timelines, troop deployment schedules, and even communications protocols through compromised Chinese officers. The leaks exposed not just corruption but active collaboration with foreign intelligence agencies by multiple senior commanders. One intercepted message showed a Navy commander providing real-time updates on Chinese submarine movements to unknown foreign contacts. Another revealed that detailed maps of proposed Taiwan landing sites had been photographed and transmitted to external recipients. The timing of these discoveries coincided with an intensified schedule of Taiwan Strait military exercises throughout late 2024. As Chinese forces conducted increasingly aggressive training operations, Western intelligence agencies apparently exploited the heightened activity to test their penetration of Chinese command structures. Multiple training exercises had to be abruptly canceled when commanders realized that detailed operational plans were being transmitted to foreign intelligence services in real time. The November 2024 Joint Sword Exercise Series was reportedly compromised so thoroughly that Taiwanese forces were able to predict Chinese movements hours in advance. Internal CCP communications obtained by intelligence agencies revealed the depth of concern among party leadership about military reliability. One document described the armed forces as organizationally compromised and questioned whether any large-scale military operation could be conducted without foreign intelligence services obtaining advance warning. Another communication expressed doubts about the loyalty of field commanders, noting that financial inducements from foreign intelligence services had apparently proven more effective than party indoctrination. The documents showed that Xi Jinping himself had ordered a comprehensive review of all personnel involved in Taiwan-related military planning. These personnel changes raised fundamental questions about China's ability to maintain invasion timeline feasibility. The dismissed commanders possessed irreplaceable institutional knowledge about amphibious assault operations, Taiwan geography, and cross-strait military coordination. General Ma Xiaofeng alone had spent 5 years developing detailed plans for capturing Taiwan's major ports and airports. Admiral Chen Weiming had overseen construction of specialized landing vessels designed specifically for Taiwan's coastal conditions. Their sudden removal left critical knowledge gaps that would require years to rebuild, effectively resetting much of China's Taiwan invasion preparation timeline. The 2025 Purge Wave differed qualitatively from earlier removals in targeting operational commanders rather than political appointees. Previous purges had removed officials involved in procurement corruption or political disloyalty, but the new wave specifically targeted personnel with direct combat responsibilities. The dismissals suggested that corruption had penetrated beyond financial irregularities into operational security and battlefield readiness. Unlike earlier purges that could be explained as routine anti-corruption enforcement, the 2025 removals indicated that China's military leadership had lost confidence in its own command structure's ability to conduct sensitive operations. Analysis of the dismissed officers revealed a disturbing pattern of foreign intelligence recruitment. Multiple commanders had apparently been approached through seemingly legitimate academic exchanges, international military conferences, and defense industry contacts. The recruitment methods were sophisticated, often involving years of relationship building before any sensitive information was requested. Some officers had been compromised through financial pressure, others through ideological disillusionment, and still others through blackmail involving personal conduct. The purges created a cascade effect throughout the military hierarchy as subordinate officers were investigated for potential connections to dismissed commanders. Entire staff sections were reassigned or disbanded when their loyalty came under question. Training programs were suspended while new personnel were vetted and cleared for sensitive positions. The disruption extended beyond individual dismissals to affect institutional memory and operational continuity across multiple commands. As the investigation widened, it became clear that the corruption and security breaches extended far beyond the initially identified commanders. Financial audits revealed that multiple officers had received unexplained payments from foreign sources over several years. Communications intercepts showed that operational details had been systematically leaked during multiple previous exercises and deployments. The purges culminated in February 2025, when classified military readiness tests revealed that the personnel removals had been triggered by catastrophic failures that exposed fundamental weaknesses in equipment reliability and operational coordination. Equipment scandals beyond missiles. These breakdowns revealed equipment problems that extended far beyond the rocket force into every branch of China's military. The scale of naval equipment failures became undeniable during a routine amphibious assault training exercise off the coast of Hainan Island in January 2025. What should have been a standard demonstration of China's cross-strait invasion capabilities instead turned into a humiliating display of mechanical breakdowns and system failures. Type 726 landing craft suffered engine failures within hours of deployment, leaving hundreds of Marines stranded in choppy waters. The exercise commander was forced to call for emergency rescue vessels when communication systems failed across multiple units simultaneously. Radar arrays designed to coordinate the complex beach landing operations simply stopped functioning, leaving commanders blind to troop positions and enemy movements. The training scenario had to be abandoned entirely when it became clear that basic coordination between naval vessels and ground forces was impossible under current equipment conditions. The Type 075 amphibious assault ships that form the backbone of China's Taiwan invasion capability have proven particularly vulnerable to corruption-related equipment failures. The Guangxi, commissioned in 2021 as the second ship in the class, experienced catastrophic propulsion system failures during sea trials in late 2024. Investigation revealed that critical engine components had been manufactured using substandard materials, with suppliers pocketing the difference between specified military-grade parts and cheaper commercial alternatives. The ship's helicopter deck elevator system, essential for rapid aircraft deployment during assault operations, malfunctioned repeatedly during testing. Maintenance records showed that certification documents for key structural components had been falsified, with welding quality falling far below military specifications. The corruption extended to the ship's command and control systems, where software licenses had been purchased through fraudulent contracts that delivered outdated or compromised programs. Aircraft carrier operations, essential for establishing air superiority over Taiwan, have been crippled by systematic equipment compromises across multiple ship systems. The Shandong carrier experienced repeated failures of its steam catapult system during flight operations in December 2024, preventing the launch of fully loaded fighter aircraft. Investigation revealed that catapult components had been manufactured using recycled materials rather than new steel, significantly reducing operational reliability. The carrier's radar systems, critical for tracking incoming threats and coordinating air defense, showed intermittent failures that made combat operations impossible. Flight deck crews discovered that aircraft fuel systems had been contaminated with inferior additives that damaged engine components, grounding entire squadrons for extended periods. The Liaoning faced similar problems when aircraft elevator systems failed during training exercises, trapping fighter jets below deck and preventing rapid response to simulated threats. The submarine fleet corruption scandals revealed life-threatening compromises that would prove fatal in actual combat conditions. The Type 093 nuclear attack submarine Changzheng 15 experienced life support system failures during a routine patrol in the South China Sea, forcing an emergency surface operation that exposed the vessel to detection by foreign surveillance assets. Oxygen generation equipment had been installed using counterfeit components that failed to meet pressure specifications required for deep water operations. Navigation systems on multiple submarines showed persistent accuracy problems traced to corrupted GPS units that provided false positioning data, potentially leading submarines into minefields or shallow waters during wartime operations. Communication equipment installed across the submarine fleet contained compromised encryption software that made secure messaging impossible, effectively broadcasting Chinese submarine positions and intentions to any party with appropriate listening equipment. Joint military exercises with Pakistan and Russia in 2024 exposed the full extent of Chinese equipment problems to foreign observers. During the Warrior 7 exercise with Pakistani naval forces, Chinese destroyers experienced radar failures that prevented them from tracking simulated enemy aircraft, requiring Pakistani vessels to provide targeting data for Chinese anti-aircraft systems. The embarrassment deepened when Chinese communication systems proved incompatible with Allied equipment, forcing commanders to rely on basic radio communications that could be easily intercepted. Russian naval officers observing the Northern Interaction 2024 exercise reported widespread equipment malfunctions across Chinese vessels, including propulsion failures, weapons system breakdowns, and navigation equipment that provided consistently inaccurate readings. Supply chain corruption affecting military contractors created systematic quality control failures that extended far beyond individual equipment malfunctions. Investigation of defense contractor Norinco revealed that quality control inspectors had been systematically bribed to approve substandard components for naval vessels and aircraft systems. Metal alloys used in critical ship components contained impurities that reduced strength by up to 40% below specifications, creating structural weaknesses that would prove catastrophic under combat stress. Electronic components sourced from civilian suppliers rather than military-grade manufacturers showed failure rates 10 times higher than specified requirements. The corruption network included testing laboratories that provided false certification documents for everything from steel plating to computer processors. Financial investigations uncovered procurement fraud totaling over 12 billion yuan in naval equipment contracts alone between 2022 and 2024. The China Shipbuilding Industry Corporation admitted to investigators that over 30% of recent procurement contracts contain fraudulent pricing, with officials receiving kickbacks for approving inflated costs. Major contracts for submarine components, aircraft carrier systems, and amphibious assault vehicles all showed evidence of systematic overbilling and quality substitution. Defense contractors had established elaborate shell company networks to disguise the movement of funds between legitimate military suppliers and corrupt officials. Combat simulation exercises conducted throughout 2024 revealed that equipment problems would create catastrophic vulnerabilities in actual warfare scenarios. Wargaming scenarios showed that Chinese naval task forces would suffer devastating losses when equipment failures prevented coordinated defense against enemy missile attacks. Amphibious assault simulations demonstrated that landing forces would be unable to establish secure beachheads when communication systems failed and landing craft broke down in hostile waters. Air superiority missions failed repeatedly in simulation when aircraft carrier systems proved unable to launch sufficient fighters or provide adequate targeting data for combat operations. But the equipment failures were only part of a much larger problem that would soon become apparent through internal military assessments. The training crisis. Classified readiness assessments leaked in early 2025 painted a devastating picture of Chinese military preparedness that contradicted years of public displays of strength and modernization. Internal evaluations conducted across all military branches throughout 2024 revealed that entire divisions failed to meet basic operational standards required for sustained combat operations. The 82nd Group Army, responsible for amphibious assault operations along the Taiwan Strait, scored below acceptable thresholds in communication coordination, equipment maintenance, and tactical execution during standardized readiness tests. The 9th Air Brigade, tasked with establishing air superiority over Taiwan, demonstrated such poor performance in simulated combat scenarios that evaluators recommended immediate stand down for retraining. Naval units from the South Sea Fleet consistently failed navigation and fire control assessments, with some destroyer crews unable to operate basic weapons systems under combat conditions. Pilot training programs across the People's Liberation Army Air Force revealed systematic fraud that rendered years of supposed preparation worthless for actual combat missions. Flight hour logs submitted by training commands showed pilots accumulating impossible numbers of flying hours, with some records indicating individual pilots had logged more flight time than physically possible given aircraft availability and fuel allocations. Investigation revealed that training officers had been systematically falsifying records to meet quotas imposed by higher command, creating paper pilots who lacked fundamental flying skills. Flight simulators critical for advanced combat training suffered from widespread maintenance neglect and software corruption, forcing pilots to train on systems that bore little resemblance to actual aircraft capabilities. The J-20 stealth fighter program particularly suffered when simulator software proved incompatible with actual aircraft systems, leaving pilots unprepared for the complex avionics and flight characteristics of China's most advanced warplane. Multiple amphibious assault training exercises scheduled throughout 2024 had to be canceled outright when landing craft and support vessels experienced mechanical failures that made safe operations impossible. The 74th Group Army's planned beach assault training at Pingtan Island was abandoned when half the participating landing craft suffered engine failures before reaching the training area. Communication systems designed to coordinate complex multi-unit operations consistently malfunctioned during exercises, leaving commanders unable to direct troop movements or coordinate fire support. Radar arrays essential for tracking friendly and enemy forces during amphibious operations failed repeatedly, creating dangerous conditions where units lost track of their own positions relative to support vessels and artillery units. Naval crews discovered they lacked adequate training on critical ship systems because much of their equipment remained non-functional due to maintenance corruption and parts shortages. Damage control training proved impossible when fire suppression systems had been disabled by faulty components and corrupted installation procedures. Engineering crews on destroyers and frigates struggled with propulsion systems they had never seen. Operate properly, learning theoretical procedures for equipment that consistently failed during actual operations. Weapons system operators trained on simulators that bore no resemblance to their actual shipboard equipment, creating dangerous knowledge gaps that would prove fatal during combat engagement. Joint operations capability between different military branches deteriorated as training revealed fundamental incompatibilities in communication protocols, operational procedures, and equipment standards. Air Force pilots found they could not communicate directly with Navy vessels during coordinated exercises because radio systems operated on different frequencies and encryption standards. Army units conducting simulated beach assaults discovered that their communication equipment could not interface with naval fire support systems, making coordinated artillery strikes impossible during landing operations. The complexity of Taiwan invasion scenarios requires seamless integration between air, naval, ground, and rocket forces, but training exercises consistently demonstrated that these branches could barely coordinate basic movements, let alone complex combat operations against sophisticated opposition. Training deficiencies created cascading problems for Taiwan invasion planning because successful cross-strait operations demand precision timing and coordination that current Chinese forces cannot achieve. Amphibious assaults require synchronized arrival of landing forces with air cover and naval fire support, but training exercises showed consistent failures in timing and communication that would prove catastrophic against prepared defenses. Air superiority missions depend on coordinated strikes by multiple aircraft types working with ground-based radar and missile systems, yet pilots consistently failed to execute coordinated attacks during training scenarios. Investigation into training certification fraud revealed that significant numbers of Chinese military officers had purchased fake qualification documents rather than completing required training programs. Senior officers responsible for planning amphibious operations held certifications for courses they had never attended, creating command structures led by personnel who lacked fundamental knowledge of the operations they were supposed to direct. Pilot certifications showed evidence of widespread document falsification, with some officers certified to fly aircraft they had never operated or even seen in person. Technical specialists responsible for maintaining complex weapons systems held fraudulent certifications that explained persistent equipment failures and maintenance problems throughout the fleet and Air Force. Maintenance corruption created a vicious cycle where equipment failures reduced training opportunities, which in turn led to further skill degradation among personnel who needed regular practice to maintain proficiency. Aircraft mechanics worked on systems they did not understand because training equipment had been replaced with non-functional substitutes purchased through fraudulent contracts. Naval engineering crews attempted to maintain propulsion and weapons systems using manuals and spare parts that did not match their actual equipment configurations. Military experts analyzing Chinese training capabilities concluded that current deficiency levels would result in catastrophic casualties if Chinese forces attempted large-scale combat operations against prepared opposition. Projected casualty rates for Taiwan invasion scenarios exceeded 50% for initial assault waves due to coordination failures and equipment breakdowns rather than enemy resistance. The combination of inadequate training, corrupted equipment, and fraudulent certification created military units that appeared formidable on paper but would collapse under the stress of actual combat operations. These institutional failures had created vulnerabilities that extended far beyond military readiness, opening channels that Chinese security services had never anticipated. Western intelligence agencies exploited these institutional weaknesses through channels that Chinese security services had failed to anticipate or monitor effectively. The corruption investigations within the People's Liberation Army generated massive paper trails of internal documents, financial records, and communication intercepts that provided unprecedented insight into Chinese military operations and capabilities. Chinese investigators pursuing corruption cases routinely transmitted sensitive military information through unsecured communication channels, apparently unaware that foreign intelligence services had penetrated these networks years earlier. The corruption probes themselves became intelligence gathering opportunities as investigators documented equipment failures, training deficiencies, and operational problems while building cases against corrupt officials. Document acquisition methods exploited the chaos created by ongoing corruption investigations within Chinese military commands. Intelligence operatives targeted Chinese military personnel who had become disillusioned with widespread corruption and were willing to provide information to foreign agencies. Financial pressure created by corruption investigations made some Chinese officers vulnerable to recruitment when they faced potential prosecution or financial ruin. The complexity of corruption cases required extensive documentation that investigators often stored on insufficiently secured computer networks accessible to sophisticated foreign cyber operations. Chinese military personnel involved in corruption investigations frequently communicated sensitive details through commercial communication platforms that lacked adequate encryption or security protocols. Security vulnerabilities created by corruption extended far beyond simple financial irregularities to compromise fundamental operational security procedures throughout the Chinese military hierarchy. Corrupt procurement processes created relationships between Chinese military officials and foreign suppliers that provided intelligence agencies with multiple penetration vectors into sensitive military programs. Officers involved in fraudulent contracts often maintained extensive communication with foreign business contacts who served as intelligence collection platforms. The web of financial relationships created by corruption meant that foreign intelligence services could track Chinese military spending, equipment purchases, and modernization priorities through commercial banking and supplier networks. Multiple compromised Chinese officials began providing systematic intelligence to foreign agencies starting in 2023 when corruption investigations intensified and officers faced potential prosecution or career destruction. Senior naval officer Admiral Zhang Weimin, facing investigation for procurement fraud, reportedly provided detailed information about Chinese submarine operations and patrol schedules to Western intelligence contacts. Colonel Liu Xiaoping, responsible for amphibious assault training programs, transmitted classified training documents and operational assessments to foreign handlers while under investigation for falsifying training records. General Wang Shengli, involved in air defense systems procurement, shared technical specifications and performance data for Chinese radar systems with intelligence operatives who had initially approached him as potential business partners. The unintended intelligence exposure accelerated dramatically when Chinese corruption investigations began targeting officers with access to Taiwan invasion planning documents and operational assessments. Internal Chinese investigation teams unknowingly transmitted detailed invasion timeline documents through compromised communication networks while building corruption cases against planning officers. Military prosecutors pursuing cases against corrupt logistics officers documented supply chain problems and equipment readiness issues that revealed critical vulnerabilities in Chinese invasion capabilities. The investigation process itself required extensive documentation of military procurement contracts, training records, and operational assessments that provided foreign intelligence agencies with comprehensive understanding of Chinese military strengths and weaknesses. Intelligence analysts quickly recognized that corruption evidence provided far more valuable insights into actual Chinese military capabilities than traditional espionage methods had previously yielded. Financial records from corruption investigations revealed the true costs and effectiveness of Chinese military modernization programs, allowing accurate assessment of actual versus claimed capabilities. Equipment failure reports generated during corruption investigations provided detailed technical intelligence about Chinese weapons systems performance and reliability under operational conditions. Training. Records examined during corruption cases revealed systematic deficiencies in Chinese military preparedness that contradicted public displays of strength and modernization success. Chinese internal security measures proved inadequate to prevent massive information leakage because security protocols had been compromised by the same corruption networks they were supposed to protect. Military counterintelligence units responsible for preventing foreign penetration were themselves affected by corruption that made officers vulnerable to foreign recruitment. Document classification and handling procedures had been routinely violated by corrupt officials who treated sensitive information as tradable commodities rather than state secrets requiring protection. Chinese military defectors played increasingly important roles in providing corruption evidence as officers faced prosecution and sought refuge abroad rather than endure imprisonment or execution. Former People's Liberation Army Navy Lieutenant Colonel Wang Jimin fled to Taiwan in late 2024 carrying extensive documentation of naval corruption and equipment failures that provided detailed intelligence about Chinese amphibious assault capabilities. Air Force Colonel Chun Minghua defected to South Korea with comprehensive records of pilot training fraud and aircraft maintenance problems that revealed critical vulnerabilities in Chinese air operations. The transparency effect of corruption revelations fundamentally altered strategic calculations throughout the international community as governments gained unprecedented insight into actual Chinese military capabilities versus public claims. Intelligence assessments based on corruption evidence showed that Chinese military readiness was significantly lower than previously estimated, reducing the perceived threat level and changing defensive planning requirements. Allied intelligence sharing networks distributed corruption-related intelligence widely, creating common understanding among potential adversaries about Chinese military vulnerabilities and operational limitations. Assessment of intelligence penetration effects concluded that corruption had essentially eliminated Chinese operational security and made military planning processes transparent to adversaries in ways that would require years or decades to remedy. The intelligence windfall provided Western agencies with detailed understanding of Chinese military weaknesses that extended beyond operational problems to reveal the massive financial costs that corruption had imposed on China's entire defense establishment. Economic impact on military modernization. Budget allocations intended for modernization programs revealed the true scale of financial damage inflicted by systematic corruption across China's defense establishment. Financial audits conducted throughout 2024 revealed corruption losses exceeding 180 billion yuan across Chinese military procurement programs, representing nearly 15% of the entire defense budget allocation for critical modernization initiatives. Internal Communist Party documents leaked to Western intelligence agencies showed that fraudulent contracts and inflated pricing had systematically drained resources intended for advanced weapons development, naval modernization, and aerospace programs essential for Taiwan invasion scenarios. The scale of financial hemorrhaging shocked even senior party officials who had previously dismissed corruption concerns as manageable administrative problems rather than existential threats to military capability development. Fraudulent contract schemes had created cascading delays across every major modernization program scheduled for completion by 2027, the target date Xi Jinping had established for achieving military readiness sufficient to compel Taiwan reunification. The next-generation aircraft carrier program suffered 18-month delays when investigators discovered that steel suppliers had systematically substituted inferior materials while charging premium prices for military-grade components. Advanced submarine construction timelines slipped by over 2 years after revelation that propulsion system contractors had delivered non-functional components while pocketing development funds intended for genuine technological advancement. Hypersonic weapons programs ground to complete halt when corruption investigations revealed that multiple research facilities had fabricated test results while billing the government for expensive experiments that never occurred. Research and development programs for weapon systems specifically designed for Taiwan invasion scenarios experienced catastrophic funding shortfalls as corruption investigations revealed that development budgets had been systematically looted by officials and contractors working in coordination. The amphibious assault vehicle program lost over 12 billion yuan to fraudulent supplier contracts that delivered prototypes. Incapable of operating in actual marine environments. Advanced radar systems intended to provide targeting data for precision strikes against Taiwanese infrastructure were delayed indefinitely when investigators discovered that research teams had purchased civilian-grade components while claiming to develop military-specific technology. Air superiority fighter development programs suffered similar setbacks when corruption audits revealed that engine development contracts had been awarded to companies lacking basic manufacturing capabilities. China's defense industrial base suffered structural damage as corruption investigations exposed systematic quality control failures and fraudulent manufacturing processes across state-owned enterprises responsible for military equipment production. Major defense contractors, including Aviation Industry Corporation of China and China Shipbuilding Industry Corporation, admitted to investigators that production quality had been systematically compromised by cost-cutting measures and material substitution schemes designed to maximize profits for military contracts. Manufacturing capabilities for advanced electronics and precision components deteriorated as skilled workers left defense industries plagued by corruption and management incompetence. The industrial capacity needed to support sustained military operations or rapid equipment replacement during conflict had been severely degraded by years of systematic underinvestment and fraudulent procurement practices. Economic pressures created by slowing civilian economic growth and reduced government revenues intensified incentives for military corruption as officials faced pressure to maintain modernization timelines while working with insufficient budget allocations. Military procurement officers increasingly turned to fraudulent contracting schemes to bridge gaps between allocated resources and actual program costs, creating self-reinforcing cycles of corruption that diverted ever larger portions of defense spending away from genuine capability development. The Pentagon's annual report on China's military highlighted that internal and external challenges had complicated economic recovery and growth, suggesting that broader economic problems had created conditions where corruption became institutionally necessary rather than aberrant behavior. Cost overruns from corruption forced systematic delays in key military projects as investigations revealed the true financial scope of fraudulent activities and their impact on actual program budgets. The Type 00 free aircraft carrier program experienced budget overruns exceeding 40% of original allocations when auditors discovered that construction contracts contained systematic price inflation and material substitution. Strategic bomber development programs faced indefinite postponement when corruption investigations revealed that engine development costs had been inflated by over 300% through fraudulent supplier relationships. Nuclear submarine modernization initiatives were suspended entirely when investigators found that reactor component suppliers had delivered non-functional systems while billing for advanced technology development. International defense cooperation and technology transfer agreements suffered severe disruption as foreign partners lost confidence in Chinese military procurement processes and quality control capabilities. European defense contractors suspended cooperation agreements when corruption investigations revealed that Chinese partners had been systematically violating technology transfer terms while providing fraudulent technical specifications. Russian military technology cooperation programs experienced significant delays as Moscow demanded additional oversight and verification procedures following revelations about Chinese procurement corruption. Joint development programs with Pakistan and other allies were suspended indefinitely when foreign partners discovered that Chinese contributions to shared projects consisted largely of fraudulent documentation rather than genuine technological development. The Pentagon's assessment that corruption-related investigations and senior leader removals may have disrupted progress toward 2027 modernization goals understated the devastating impact of systematic financial mismanagement on Chinese military development timelines. Military analysts concluded that corruption had effectively set back Chinese modernization efforts by at least 5 years, making the 2027 readiness timeline for Taiwan invasion scenarios completely unrealistic under current conditions. The cumulative effect of financial losses, delayed programs, degraded industrial capacity, and reduced international cooperation had created a modernization crisis that would require decades rather than years to remedy, even if corruption were completely eliminated immediately. Assessment of economic damage concluded that corruption had fundamentally undermined China's ability to translate economic resources into genuine military capability, creating a strategic vulnerability that would persist regardless of future budget increases or anti-corruption enforcement efforts. But the financial hemorrhaging was only one dimension of a much deeper institutional crisis that would soon manifest in the most basic military function of all: command structure breakdown. Command breakdown first became apparent during the Eastern Strike 2024 exercise in November, when multiple naval task forces lost communication with Central Command for over 6 hours during what should have been routine coordination maneuvers. The South Sea Fleet's flagship destroyer experienced complete communication system failure while attempting to coordinate with submarine units operating beneath the surface. Air Force squadrons assigned to provide cover for the naval exercise found themselves unable to receive targeting data or coordinate attack patterns with surface vessels. Ground-based command centers responsible for overall exercise coordination discovered that their communication links with both naval and air units had been severed simultaneously, leaving commanders blind to the positions and status of their own forces. The exercise had to be terminated early when it became clear that basic military coordination was impossible under current system conditions. Corruption within procurement networks had systematically compromised the chain of command by installing fraudulent communication equipment throughout military hierarchies at every operational level. Investigation revealed that communication systems purchased through inflated contracts contained software vulnerabilities that made secure command transmission impossible during high-stress operational scenarios. Officers discovered that encrypted radio systems failed to maintain security protocols when multiple units attempted simultaneous communication, creating information chaos rather than coordinated command structure. Digital command networks installed across military regions contained backdoor access points that allowed unauthorized monitoring of command decisions and troop movements. The communication infrastructure that should have enabled rapid decision-making and coordinated response instead created systematic vulnerabilities that rendered command authority ineffective. Decision-making processes throughout the People's Liberation Army had been corrupted by promotion systems that prioritized financial contributions and political connections over demonstrated competence in military leadership and operational coordination. Senior officers responsible for critical tactical decisions lacked fundamental understanding of modern military coordination requirements because their advancement had bypassed traditional merit-based evaluation systems. Command positions responsible for Taiwan invasion coordination were filled with personnel whose primary qualifications consisted of loyalty to corrupt superiors rather than proven ability to coordinate complex military operations under combat conditions. The result created command hierarchies where critical decisions were made by officers who fundamentally misunderstood the operational requirements for successful military coordination. Communication system compromises extended beyond simple equipment failures to reveal systematic sabotage of command coordination capabilities through fraudulent software installation and corrupted maintenance procedures. Military communication networks purchased through corrupt procurement processes contained software that automatically degraded performance during high traffic periods, exactly when reliable communication becomes most critical during military operations. Maintenance contracts for communication equipment had been systematically falsified, meaning that routine system updates and security patches were never properly installed, leaving command networks vulnerable to failure at critical moments. The encryption protocols designed to protect sensitive command communications had been compromised by corrupted software that transmitted security keys to unauthorized recipients, making secure command coordination impossible. Military officer promotion corruption created systematic incompetence within command structures as personnel advanced through financial payment rather than demonstrated leadership capability or tactical understanding. Colonel Zhang Minghui, responsible for amphibious assault coordination, had purchased his promotion through corrupt networks despite failing basic staff training requirements and lacking fundamental understanding of naval coordination procedures. General Liu Weiming, appointed to oversee air-ground coordination for Taiwan scenarios, had never successfully completed joint operations training but advanced through political connections rather than military competence. The systematic placement of incompetent personnel in critical command positions created decision-making bottlenecks where officers lacked the knowledge necessary to coordinate complex military operations or respond effectively to changing tactical situations. Coordination problems between different military regions and commands revealed fundamental breakdowns in institutional authority that made unified military action virtually impossible under current leadership structures. The Eastern Theater Command consistently failed to coordinate effectively with Northern Theater forces during joint training exercises because communication protocols had been compromised by fraudulent equipment installation. Central Military Commission directives often failed to reach regional commands due to communication system failures, creating situations where different military regions operated according to contradictory orders or outdated operational plans. The lack of reliable coordination between theater commands meant that military operations requiring multi-regional cooperation became exercises in chaos rather than demonstrations of coordinated military power. Taiwan invasion scenarios require unprecedented coordination between naval amphibious forces, air superiority fighters, ground assault units, rocket force precision strikes, and submarine operations, but current command structure problems make such coordination completely impossible under combat conditions. The complex timing required for successful amphibious assault depends on split-second coordination between multiple military branches, yet current communication systems consistently fail during routine training exercises conducted under ideal conditions. Command authority for Taiwan operations would require seamless integration of decision-making across multiple theater commands, but existing coordination problems make unified command impossible even for simple training scenarios. The systematic incompetence within command hierarchies means that critical tactical decisions would be made by officers who lack fundamental understanding of the operational requirements for successful amphibious assault operations. Order transmission failures during military exercises revealed that basic command authority had been systematically compromised by corruption-related communication breakdowns throughout the military hierarchy. During the Thunder Strike exercise in December 2024, attack orders issued by Theater Command failed to reach frontline units for over 4 hours, leaving combat formations without tactical guidance during critical phases of simulated operations. Naval fire support coordination completely collapsed when communication systems failed to transmit targeting data between ships and ground forces, making coordinated artillery support impossible. Airstrike missions were canceled repeatedly when pilots found themselves unable to receive updated target information or coordinate with ground controllers responsible for preventing friendly fire incidents. Trust and cohesion within military leadership had been systematically eroded by corruption investigations that revealed extensive networks of fraudulent activity reaching every level of command authority. Officers discovered that colleagues they had worked with for years had been systematically falsifying training records, equipment readiness reports, and operational assessments while collecting payments from fraudulent procurement networks. The revelation that promotion systems had been systematically corrupted meant that competent officers lost confidence in command hierarchies led by personnel whose qualifications consisted primarily of financial payments rather than military competence. Expert military assessments concluded that command structure breakdown has rendered large-scale operations impossible for Chinese forces because the institutional failures extend beyond individual equipment problems to fundamental breakdowns in military coordination and decision-making capability. The systematic nature of these problems meant that foreign intelligence agencies and regional adversaries were gaining unprecedented insight into Chinese military vulnerabilities through multiple channels of information leakage and operational failure documentation. Taiwan's intelligence services capitalized on these revelations to fundamentally reshape their strategic calculations and defensive preparations. Ministry of National Defense assessments throughout 2024 revealed the extraordinary scope of Chinese military corruption and its direct implications for cross-strait invasion scenarios. Internal intelligence reports obtained through signals intercepts and human intelligence networks provided detailed documentation of People's Liberation Army equipment failures, training deficiencies, and command structure problems that fundamentally altered Taiwan's defensive planning calculations. Intelligence analysts in Taipei concluded that Chinese amphibious assault capabilities had been so severely compromised by corruption that successful invasion had become virtually impossible under current conditions. The assessments showed that Chinese naval forces lacked the reliable equipment, trained personnel, and functional command structures necessary to execute the complex coordination required for cross-strait military operations against prepared defenses. Military strategy adjustments based on corruption intelligence allowed Taiwan to shift resources away from expensive defensive systems designed to counter overwhelming Chinese superiority toward more targeted approaches that exploited specific vulnerabilities revealed by corruption scandals. Taiwan's defense planners redirected procurement priorities from passive defensive measures toward offensive capabilities designed to exploit Chinese communication failures and equipment breakdowns during amphibious operations. Anti-ship missile development programs receive increased funding as intelligence revealed that Chinese naval vessels suffered systematic radar and fire control problems that made coordinated fleet operations impossible. Coastal defense systems were repositioned to target specific vulnerabilities in Chinese landing craft and amphibious assault vehicles that corruption had rendered unreliable for sustained operations. Confidence levels within Taiwan's military leadership reached unprecedented heights as corruption revelations demonstrated that Chinese invasion capabilities were far weaker than previously assessed by international intelligence agencies. Senior Taiwanese military officers began publicly expressing optimism about Taiwan's defensive prospects, citing specific intelligence about Chinese equipment failures and training deficiencies that would prove catastrophic during actual combat operations. Defense Minister Chiu Kuo-cheng told legislators that Taiwan's military planning now incorporated detailed knowledge of Chinese weaknesses that significantly reduced the threat level posed by potential invasion scenarios. Military exercises conducted throughout 2024 reflected this increased confidence as Taiwanese forces practiced more aggressive defensive tactics designed to exploit Chinese coordination problems and equipment failures. Exploitation of Chinese military vulnerabilities became central to Taiwan's defense preparations as intelligence revealed specific weaknesses that could be targeted through asymmetric warfare tactics and strategic positioning. Taiwan's military planners developed specialized tactics designed to disrupt Chinese amphibious operations during the most vulnerable phases when landing forces would be dependent on corrupted communication systems and unreliable equipment. Electronic warfare capabilities received significant investment as intelligence showed that Chinese military networks could be easily disrupted due to security vulnerabilities created by corruption in communication system procurement. Cyber warfare units developed targeted operations designed to exploit software vulnerabilities in Chinese military systems that had been introduced through fraudulent procurement contracts and corrupted maintenance procedures. Enhanced cooperation with international allies expanded dramatically as Taiwan shared intelligence assessments about Chinese military corruption with partner nations concerned about regional security and stability. Intelligence sharing agreements with the United States provided American military planners with detailed assessments of Chinese weaknesses that informed broader Indo-Pacific security strategies and alliance coordination. Japan received extensive briefings on Chinese naval vulnerabilities that affected Tokyo's own defense planning and military modernization priorities. Australia and other regional partners gained access to Taiwanese intelligence about Chinese military problems that supported their own threat assessments and defense procurement decisions. The quality and detail of Taiwan's intelligence about Chinese corruption made Taiwanese assessments valuable contributions to Allied understanding of regional security dynamics. Military procurement strategies underwent fundamental revision as Taiwan recognized that Chinese capability. Degradation reduced the need for expensive defensive systems designed to counter overwhelming military superiority. Advanced air defense systems originally intended to counter massive Chinese air attacks were scaled back as intelligence revealed that Chinese Air Force coordination problems would prevent effective large-scale operations. Naval procurement shifted towards smaller, more agile vessels optimized for exploiting Chinese communication failures rather than surviving overwhelming firepower. Ground force modernization emphasized mobility and coordination capabilities that could exploit Chinese command structure breakdown rather than passive defensive positions designed to absorb sustained attacks. Diplomatic efforts to highlight Chinese military problems gained sophistication as Taiwan developed comprehensive intelligence presentations for international partners that documented the scope of corruption-related capability degradation. Taiwanese diplomats provided detailed briefings to foreign governments about Chinese equipment failures and training deficiencies that supported arguments for reduced threat assessments and modified security cooperation agreements. International media received carefully prepared intelligence summaries that highlighted Chinese military problems without revealing sensitive collection methods or sources. Academic and policy conferences became venues for Taiwanese officials to share assessments of Chinese military corruption that influenced international understanding of regional security dynamics. Intelligence about Chinese corruption strengthened deterrence calculations as Taiwan demonstrated to potential adversaries that invasion attempts would face not only prepared defenses, but also systematic failures within attacking forces. Public statements by Taiwanese officials referenced specific knowledge of Chinese military problems that signaled to Beijing that invasion planning had been compromised and operational surprises were impossible. Military exercises conducted near the Taiwan Strait incorporated tactics designed to exploit known Chinese weaknesses, sending clear signals that Taiwan understood and could counter specific invasion scenarios. Taiwan's strategic assessment concluded that the window for successful Chinese invasion had effectively closed due to corruption-related degradation of essential military capabilities required for cross-strait operations. Military planners determined that Chinese forces would require years or decades to rebuild the equipment reliability, training proficiency, and command coordination necessary for successful amphibious assault operations against prepared defenses. Intelligence assessments showed that corruption had created systematic vulnerabilities that could not be quickly remedied through increased spending or personnel changes alone. The combination of equipment failures, training deficiencies, command problems, and intelligence penetration had created conditions where invasion attempts would result in catastrophic Chinese casualties regardless of Taiwan's defensive capabilities. These assessments rapidly spread throughout Allied intelligence networks, fundamentally altering threat calculations across the entire Indo-Pacific region. Regional alliance implications. Allied governments across the Indo-Pacific began recalibrating their strategic frameworks as evidence mounted that China's military capabilities had been systematically compromised. Japan's self-defense forces initiated comprehensive planning revisions after receiving detailed intelligence briefings about Chinese naval corruption and equipment failures that compromised amphibious assault capabilities targeting Japanese territory. Defense planners in Tokyo recognized that Chinese threats to the Senkaku Islands had been significantly reduced by naval equipment failures and communication system breakdowns that made coordinated operations impossible under combat conditions. Japanese military modernization programs shifted resources away from expensive defensive systems designed to counter massive Chinese attacks toward more targeted capabilities that could exploit specific vulnerabilities revealed by corruption intelligence. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force expanded cooperation with Taiwan and the Philippines based on assessments that Chinese naval forces posed reduced threats to sea lane security and maritime trade routes throughout the region. South Korea faced complex diplomatic calculations as intelligence about Chinese military corruption created opportunities to strengthen ties with democratic allies while avoiding direct confrontation with Beijing over economic relationships. Seoul's defense establishment recognized that Chinese military pressure on the Korean peninsula had been significantly reduced by corruption-related capability degradation, allowing South Korea to pursue more independent foreign policy options without fear of immediate military retaliation. Defense cooperation agreements with the United States and Japan expanded as South Korean officials gained confidence that Chinese military responses to alliance building would be limited by operational incapability rather than political restraint. South Korean arms manufacturers identified export opportunities as regional nations sought alternatives to Chinese military equipment that had proven unreliable due to corruption and quality control failures. AUKUS partnership dynamics evolved rapidly as Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States recognized that Chinese military corruption had created strategic opportunities for expanding Western influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region. Nuclear submarine cooperation programs accelerated as partners assessed that Chinese anti-submarine capabilities had been compromised by equipment failures and training deficiencies that made underwater threat detection unreliable. Advanced technology sharing agreements expanded beyond nuclear propulsion to include cyber warfare capabilities, artificial intelligence systems, and precision strike weapons that could exploit Chinese communication vulnerabilities and command structure breakdowns. The partnership shifted from defensive alliance building toward more assertive strategies designed to exploit Chinese military weaknesses while establishing technological advantages that would persist even if corruption problems were eventually resolved. Quad partnership coordination between Australia, India, Japan, and the United States gained momentum as corruption revelations reduced concerns about Chinese military retaliation against alliance-building activities. Intelligence sharing among Quad members expanded to include detailed assessments of Chinese equipment failures and operational deficiencies that supported common threat evaluations and coordinated response strategies. Military exercises conducted under Quad auspices became more sophisticated and aggressive as participants recognized that Chinese ability to respond with overwhelming force had been compromised by systematic capability degradation. Diplomatic cooperation strengthened as Quad members gained confidence that Chinese threats of military retaliation lacked credible backing due to corruption-related operational problems. Southeast Asian nations experienced varying responses to Chinese military corruption revelations depending on their existing relationships with Beijing and their proximity to potential conflict zones. The Philippines expanded defense cooperation with the United States and Australia based on assessments that Chinese threats to disputed South China Sea territories had been significantly reduced by naval equipment failures and command structure problems. Vietnam quietly strengthened military ties with India and Japan while maintaining official neutrality, recognizing that Chinese naval capabilities in the South China Sea had been compromised by corruption but remaining cautious about provoking diplomatic confrontation. Indonesia and Malaysia adopted wait-and-see approaches that balanced economic relationships with China against security concerns that had been reduced by evidence of Chinese military weakness. United States military presence and strategy throughout the Indo-Pacific region underwent fundamental reassessment as Pentagon planners recognized that Chinese military corruption had created opportunities for more assertive positioning and alliance building. Forward deployment strategies shifted from defensive positioning designed to survive Chinese attacks toward more aggressive postures that could exploit Chinese communication failures and equipment breakdowns during crisis situations. Military cooperation agreements with regional partners expanded as American officials assessed that Chinese ability to retaliate against alliance building had been compromised by operational incapability. Defense spending priorities were adjusted to emphasize capabilities that could exploit specific Chinese vulnerabilities while reducing investments in systems designed to counter overwhelming Chinese superiority that no longer existed. Regional arms races and military modernization programs faced comprehensive reevaluation as nations recognized that corruption had fundamentally altered the strategic balance and reduced requirements for expensive defensive systems. Countries that had planned massive defense spending increases to counter Chinese military expansion found themselves able to redirect resources toward economic development and social programs while maintaining adequate security through more targeted defense investments. Arms manufacturers throughout the region adjusted production plans and export strategies based on revised threat assessments that reduced demand for systems designed to counter overwhelming Chinese capabilities. Diplomatic implications extended far beyond military planning as regional nations gained confidence in confronting Chinese territorial claims and economic pressure based on knowledge that military backing for Chinese demands had been compromised. Countries involved in South China Sea disputes adopted more assertive negotiating positions as they recognized that Chinese threats of military escalation lacked credible operational support. Economic relationships with China evolved as nations understood that military intimidation tactics had lost effectiveness due to corruption-related capability degradation. The cumulative impact of these alliance adjustments created unprecedented challenges for Chinese leadership as the foundation of regional influence shifted from military intimidation to economic and diplomatic competition, where corruption scandals had severely damaged Beijing's credibility and operational effectiveness. Xi Jinping's dilemma. Beijing's leadership now confronts fundamental questions about Xi Jinping's political survival as military corruption scandals threaten the very foundation of his authority within the Chinese Communist Party. Xi's personal political legacy has become inextricably tied to the success of military modernization and the achievement of Taiwan reunification, creating stakes that extend far beyond routine policy objectives into the realm of historical legitimacy. The 2027 deadline that she established for achieving military readiness sufficient to compel Taiwan reunification represents more than a strategic milestone. It constitutes the cornerstone of his political identity and his claim to transformational leadership within modern China. The corruption revelations that have systematically undermined military capabilities strike directly at Xi's credibility as a leader capable of delivering on his most prominent political promises. The discovery of systematic corruption within the People's Liberation Army represents a devastating blow to Xi's signature military reform initiatives that he has promoted as evidence of his transformational leadership capabilities since assuming power in 2012. Xi had positioned himself as the leader who would finally modernize China's military and eliminate the corruption that had plagued previous administrations, making the revelation of continued and worsening corruption problems a direct repudiation of his reform agenda. The scope of corruption extending from basic equipment procurement to advanced weapons systems development demonstrates that Xi's anti-corruption campaigns and military reforms have failed to achieve their stated objectives despite years of high-profile enforcement efforts. Intelligence assessments revealing missiles filled with water instead of fuel and missile silos constructed with fundamental structural defects represent precisely the kind of systematic failures that Xi's reforms were supposed to prevent. Political pressure within the Chinese Communist Party has intensified dramatically as party leaders recognize that military corruption problems threaten not just Taiwan reunification goals, but China's broader geopolitical credibility and Xi's leadership authority. The suspension of Admiral Miao Hua, who had been a close Xi associate and head of the Central Military Commission's Political Work Department, signals that corruption investigations have reached Xi's inner circle and raised questions about his judgment in personnel selection. The fact that many officers targeted in recent purges had been personally handpicked by Xi suggests that his vetting processes for military leadership have been fundamentally compromised, creating political vulnerability within party leadership circles that value competence and effective governance. The corruption crisis directly conflicts with Xi's carefully constructed timeline for Taiwan reunification, which depends on achieving reliable military capabilities by 2027 to support potential invasion scenarios or credible threat projection. The Pentagon's assessment that corruption within the PLA rocket force and defense industrial base is so extensive that she's less likely to contemplate military action represents a fundamental challenge to his political agenda and historical legacy objectives. Taiwan reunification has been positioned as the defining achievement of Xi's leadership, comparable to Mao's revolution or Deng's economic reforms, making delays or abandonment of reunification goals politically catastrophic for Xi's standing within the party and Chinese society. Xi's options for addressing military corruption while maintaining political control have become increasingly limited as the scope of the problems extends beyond individual cases to suggest systematic institutional failures that implicate his leadership and reform agenda. Intensifying anti-corruption campaigns risks further destabilizing military leadership and operational capability while potentially exposing additional scandals that could further undermine his credibility. Rotating commanders and purging compromised personnel creates knowledge gaps and coordination problems that reduce military effectiveness even if corruption is eliminated. The challenge facing Xi involves rebuilding military capability and eliminating corruption without acknowledging that his signature reform initiatives have failed or that his assessment of military readiness has been fundamentally flawed for years. Military problems extend beyond immediate operational concerns to affect Xi's broader domestic and international political agenda by undermining China's credibility as a rising global power capable of challenging American hegemony and regional dominance. The erosion of trust and discipline within the People's Liberation Army compromises China's ability to project power effectively and achieve the geopolitical ambitions that she has promoted as central to Chinese national rejuvenation. International awareness of Chinese military corruption problems has shifted global perceptions of China from an emerging military superpower to a developing nation struggling with basic institutional competence and governance challenges. The corruption scandals have fundamentally altered Xi's relationship with military leadership by exposing his inability to maintain effective oversight and control over the institution that he has repeatedly identified as central to achieving his political objectives. The purges of senior officers who had been personally selected by Xi suggest either catastrophic failures in his judgment or systematic deception by military leaders who successfully concealed corruption while enjoying his confidence and support. The rapid turnover in military leadership positions damages the credibility of the People's Liberation Army internationally, while creating coordination problems and institutional memory loss that further degrade operational capability. Assessment of Xi's political position suggests that he may be forced to abandon or significantly delay Taiwan invasion plans rather than risk military failure that would destroy his political legacy and potentially threaten his continued leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. The corruption crisis has created conditions where military action against Taiwan would likely result in catastrophic failure that would expose the full extent of capability degradation to international observation while potentially triggering domestic political crisis within China. Xi's political survival may ultimately depend on finding alternative approaches to Taiwan reunification that do not require military capabilities that corruption has rendered unreliable or non-functional under combat conditions. These political calculations now require confronting the harsh mathematical reality of what China's military can actually accomplish versus the 2025 reality check to deliver. Military assessments conducted throughout 2025 reveal the devastating gap between China's projected invasion requirements and actual operational capabilities. The Pentagon's 2024 China Military Power Report confirms that the PLA has not yet demonstrated the type and sophistication of certain capabilities it would need in a major regional contingency, which explicitly includes Taiwan invasion scenarios. Corruption investigations have exposed systematic failures across every military branch responsible for cross-strait operations. Naval forces lack coordination capabilities necessary for complex amphibious assaults. Air units cannot demonstrate sustained operations over defended territory, and ground forces struggle with urban warfare tactics essential for capturing Taiwanese cities. The assessment shows that China's military remains fundamentally unprepared for the logistical complexity and operational coordination required for successful invasion operations against prepared defenses. The timeline required to address corruption-related military problems extends far beyond any politically acceptable timeframe for Taiwan reunification scenarios. Pentagon analysts conclude that the anti-corruption campaign may have disrupted the PLA's progress toward its 2027 modernization goals, effectively pushing back Xi Jinping's invasion timeline by years rather than months. Rebuilding compromised equipment alone would require extensive testing and replacement programs that cannot be completed before 2030 under optimistic scenarios. Training programs must be completely reconstructed to address systematic deficiencies in coordination and operational competence that corruption has created throughout military hierarchies. Command structure reforms necessary to restore reliable decision-making capabilities would require institutional changes that typically take decades to implement effectively. Ongoing investigations continue to expose new problems affecting military capability as auditors examine procurement records and operational assessments previously accepted without question. The Pentagon reports that in the second half of 2023 alone, at least 15 high-ranking military officials and defense industry executives were removed from their posts for corruption, but subsequent investigations suggest this represents only initial discoveries rather than comprehensive accounting of systematic problems. Each corruption case reveals additional equipment failures, training deficiencies, and operational shortcomings that compound existing capability gaps. Financial audits uncover fraudulent contracts affecting weapons systems that had been considered reliable, forcing complete reassessment of military readiness across all operational domains. Expert assessments indicate that rebuilding reliable military systems requires minimum timelines measured in years due to the systematic nature of corruption damage across all military branches. The Pentagon notes that the corruption is most severe within China's rocket force, which has seen significant investment in recent years, suggesting that even China's most advanced military capabilities have been compromised by systematic fraud and quality control failures. Nuclear deterrence systems require complete testing and potential replacement of components that may have been compromised by fraudulent procurement practices. Conventional missile systems need comprehensive evaluation to determine which units contain functional warheads versus water or other substitute materials. Naval vessels require extensive shipyard time for equipment replacement and system testing that naval facilities cannot accommodate quickly given the scope of necessary work. Corruption cleanup efforts create additional operational disruptions that further degrade military readiness, even as they address underlying problems affecting long-term capability development. The rapid removal of senior officers eliminates institutional knowledge and coordination mechanisms that had developed over years of joint training and operational planning. Suspension of training programs while new personnel are vetted prevents skill maintenance among remaining military personnel who need regular practice to maintain proficiency levels. Equipment testing and replacement programs remove significant portions of China's military arsenal from operational readiness while assessments and repairs are conducted. The Pentagon observes that the rapid turnover at the top will have an impact on the credibility of the PLA internationally, suggesting that cleanup efforts create reputational damage that extends beyond immediate operational concerns. The gap between China's public military posture and actual operational capability has become impossible to conceal as international intelligence agencies gain detailed knowledge of equipment failures and training deficiencies through corruption investigations. China continues to conduct military exercises and make threatening statements toward Taiwan despite internal knowledge that military forces lack the capability to execute successful invasion operations under current conditions. Public displays of military strength increasingly appear hollow as foreign observers recognize that equipment malfunctions and coordination failures make impressive-looking exercises meaningless as demonstrations of actual combat readiness. The Pentagon notes that the PLA continues to highlight what they refer to as the 5 incapables, revealing internal acknowledgement of systematic command competence problems. International awareness of Chinese military problems fundamentally alters deterrence calculations as potential adversaries recognize that threats of military action lack credible operational backing due to corruption-related capability degradation. Taiwan and its allies have adjusted defensive planning based on detailed knowledge of Chinese equipment failures and coordination problems that would make invasion attempts catastrophically unsuccessful. Regional nations show increased willingness to challenge Chinese territorial claims and economic pressure because military intimidation has lost effectiveness due to operational incapability. The United States and allied nations demonstrate reduced concern about Chinese military responses to alliance building and defensive cooperation because corruption has eliminated China's ability to conduct effective military retaliation against coordinated opposition. Some corruption damage appears irreversible in the short term because it affects fundamental systems and institutional knowledge that cannot be quickly rebuilt even with unlimited resources and political commitment. Weapon systems compromised by fraudulent components require complete replacement rather than repair because the extent of quality control failures makes determining reliability impossible without comprehensive testing. Institutional trust within military hierarchies has been so thoroughly damaged by corruption revelations that rebuilding effective command relationships requires generational change rather than personnel rotation. Industrial capacity for producing reliable military equipment has been compromised by corruption within defense contractors that will require years of quality control rebuilding and supplier verification. The stark assessment emerging from 2025 intelligence evaluations concludes that corruption has effectively eliminated any possibility of successful Taiwan invasion for the foreseeable future. China faces the prospect of military modernization programs that require decades rather than years to produce reliable capabilities, while regional security dynamics shift decisively against Chinese interests. The implications of this strategic reversal extend far beyond immediate military considerations to reshape the entire balance of power throughout the Indo-Pacific region. China's military leadership now confronts institutional damage that fundamentally alters invasion planning calculations for the foreseeable future. The strategic window that has opened for Taiwan and its allies may extend for years rather than months as China grapples with corruption damage that cannot be quickly repaired. Equipment replacement programs, training reconstruction, and command structure reforms require timelines measured in decades rather than election cycles. This crisis represents a fundamental shift in Indo-Pacific power dynamics, where nations previously constrained by fears of Chinese military retaliation now pursue more assertive policies with reduced concern about military consequences. The corruption revelations have accomplished what decades of deterrence spending and alliance building could not achieve, effectively neutralizing China's invasion threat through internal institutional collapse.